what made you want to research in this field? What interested you?
What interested me is there's no treatment, there's no cure, there's no help. If you're cocaine dependent, that's it. That's your life. You can't do anything about it.
Good afternoon, good morning on your side, and welcome, Dakota, to Ph.D. Hard Talk. How are you today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I am very excited.
Excellent. So could you please introduce your research to us and the world out there?
Yeah, of course. So my research primarily focuses on cocaine use disorders. If I were to boil down what I do into its simplest form, I do what's called rat cocaine self-administration. I take these rats, put them in a box, a chamber, where they have a lever, and they're hooked up to an intravenous tube, catheter. Whenever they press the lever, it gives them a direct IV injection of cocaine solution, and I essentially measure that behavior, and I'm using it to understand how to target this behavior. So once we understand the pharmacological method at which cocaine is taken, we can start to understand how to pharmacologically target these behaviors.
Okay, so I understand what you're saying. How does that benefit the community out there?
So that's a really important thing. So cocaine drug abuse has been around for hundreds of years. The first, I think, documented instances of cocaine abuse are going back to like Sigmund Freud. He used to give it out to his patients all the time. And then he had one of his patients who was just constantly coming back, calling him, asking for more and more and more. And it didn't end well for that guy. But in all of those hundreds of years, there are zero treatments, zero pharmacological treatments, nothing approved by the FDA. The closest treatment we have is literally take cocaine away from them, send them to therapy, and hope they get better. So what I'm working on is trying to develop a drug or a therapy, a treatment that will actually help these people stop taking cocaine. Because a lot of them want to stop taking cocaine. It's really difficult to, and you can see it in other drugs of abuse like opioids and amphetamines and things like that, where they want to stop. And there are pharmacological treatments for those people. You know, there's Narcan and for opioids, and it works. Bupropion for like smoking cessation, and they have a positive effect, and the people are able to stop or kind of wean themselves off with like methadone. But with cocaine, there's nothing. You're just kind of out of luck.
Okay, so I'm now trying to understand in terms of the cocaine industry, it brings in a lot of money. I know that in terms of police, it does, we have to be honest. And, I know that the police, they are policing in terms of what goes out there. They stop it from coming into the countries where we're based. You're based in the US. There's so many documentaries in terms of stopping the smuggling from Mexico, etc., Cuba and all those countries, even Africa as well. And I'm just trying to understand if for well over 100 years, no one's come up with it. Do you think that you will be permitted to do so? Because I'm sure there's someone who was in the lab like 50 years ago who came up with something to assist those who are addicted, to help them to have a better life. And you're coming up in the 2000s, 2001, to say, well, I've come up with this. Do you think that it will be allowed to be sold?
That's a really good question. So to your first point, if somebody has basically done this before, the answer is yes. There have actually been lots of treatments with dopamine antagonists. So cocaine works on the dopamine system. You have these little pumps in your neurons in your brain that remove dopamine molecules from the synapses. Cocaine gets in there, locks those pumps up, increases dopamine levels. In the past, they've tried using dopamine antagonists, which from a pharmacological standpoint makes perfect sense. Increasing dopamine binding to the receptors. If you antagonize that effect, you should antagonize the taking of cocaine. Now, this is where my research starts to come in, because they have found lots of mixed results. So like you said, 50 years ago, or more like in the 80s and 90s, people were testing these dopamine antagonists clinically and in labs, and they found a whole grab bag of results. Some people found it makes the animals and humans take more cocaine. It exacerbates the condition. Others found the exact opposite, that it attenuates it, that they're taking less cocaine.
Mhm.
And because of these mixed findings, it kind of just died in its tracks. It just stopped. They said, well, if it's working, then it'll work, but it's also not working, so it's not worth investing the money and pursuing this. Most people use what's known as a psychological model for this behavior. The reward pathway is what it's generally referred to. And that says, you know, the more you want cocaine or the more you like cocaine, the more you'll take.
Mhm.
And they measure these behaviors through this pathway of wanting and craving, which gives them these mixed results. So what I do is I look at these behaviors through a chemical pharmacological pathway, which is, you know, we give our antagonist, and what do we see happen to the levels or cocaine concentrations inside the animal? How does that affect their lever pressing behavior?
Mhm.
So what I've found is it's really dependent on the conditions at which these antagonists are administered. If you give the antagonist beforehand, so some of these experiments gave them way before, they chronically would give these antagonists, and that would cause what's called sensitization in your brain. Your brain is going to recruit more spare receptors. Those spare receptors are going to bind those dopamine molecules as if there were no antagonist present, which is why they would see that there's an increase in the amount of cocaine the humans are taking.
Right.
So with our model, we do what's called the compulsion zone. We have a low concentration
Mhm.
at which self-administration behavior is induced. Above that low concentration, the rats will just keep pressing that lever and taking more cocaine until they reach a higher threshold, which we call the
Right.
satiety threshold. At that threshold, they're going to stop taking cocaine until, through the pharmacokinetics of cocaine, its half-life is eliminated and it goes back below that threshold, at which time they'll press the lever again. And they do this with such regularity that they've essentially become like a thermostat, where as soon as they drop below the level, the heater or whatever kicks on, they push the lever, concentration goes back above, and they will maintain that essentially ad infinitum, as far as we can tell. We can't keep a rat in a box for, days, but we did for hours before, and they would just maintain like a clock every single time. And it's so regular, we're able to fit an equation to it. And this
Okay.
equation is able to predict when the rat will press the lever and what their satiety level is. So going back to humans,
Yeah.
when we give the humans the antagonist, we're essentially raising that compulsion zone. So if we're able to raise it high enough where they don't prime, where they'll stop taking cocaine entirely. But if they do prime, they're going to take more cocaine because now they have this increased threshold. So
Mhm.
if the threshold was, let's say, 1,000 just units, arbitrary units, it's not a thing, but 1,000 units of cocaine, and now we give this antagonist, it's 2,000 units of cocaine. So now the researchers we're seeing and the clinical physicians we're seeing, humans are taking twice as much cocaine as they were without the antagonist. So clearly cocaine is more rewarding when you give them an antagonist.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, other researchers doing the same thing were able to give a dose that prevented humans from being primed, essentially. So they see the humans don't take as much cocaine, or they stop taking cocaine faster. So they say it makes it less rewarding, which is very contradictory. But if we look at it through the pharmacological model, you see that the level of cocaine never reached the amount required to induce their self-administration behavior. Does that make sense? I know it's a lot and it's kind of confusing.
It does make sense. I guess what I want to ask, going back to the rats that you're using, are they male and female, or are they actually male?
Predominantly male. that's how it had been done for a very long time in my lab's history. I have actually been the first person to essentially pioneer using female rats in my lab, and it's so far giving interesting results. It's still a little too early to fully comment, but what I can see is that there is just generally more variability in female rats compared to male rats, but overall the same patterns.
So what I was trying to get to is that at Derby University, where I do attend, we've got Professor David Guest, and he's been looking at addicts in the US. And in terms of his findings, he's been doing this for 20 years, and he's realized that when it comes to males and females, through addiction to cocaine, they behave differently. And for them to stop, it's a journey for males and it's a journey for females. Males, they look for community in terms of their behaviors and how they can come off it, and they work together. Whereas women, there are other challenges in terms of they've got children, so they know that I have to change my behaviors ASAP. Otherwise, and then it happens when they're 18, they just come back and they're addicted again. So I guess what I was trying to get to is to understand whether you're using male and female rats, because I presume they will behave differently, to which you've answered. So thank you for that. In terms of the animals that you're using, I mean, we've got people in the world right now that are telling us not to wear fur, not to eat meat because it's really bad. We're treating animals in a bad way. How do you ensure that you're not persecuted verbally in a negative light for using rats?
Aside from just treating my animals as wonderfully as I can, I am generally discouraged from taking photos of them, posting it on social media, things of that nature. And I understand why, because as you said, people will see that and it's like, it can be very upsetting for some people, and I understand that. And I just would like people to know that rats, or at least animals in research, are treated incredibly well. They are taken care of on a daily basis. They are constantly given medicine if they ever fall sick. For me personally, I go down and I play with them every day, like just so they're nice and handled. So the people that work with my rats, they call them like little dogs. They say they're like little puppies because they're just always so happy to see a human, and they're always so like willing to be handled and touched. So it's kind of difficult because, you know, we have to use animal models because the alternative is using human models, and that has a whole slew of other ethical implications that are much more difficult to tackle than using rats, which I really love my rats. I'm not gonna lie. They they do a good job. They generate a lot of data, and they're always really sweet and happy to see me.
Brilliant. So going back to the word, sorry for laughing, it's because you said you play with them. And I'm really scared of rats. So I was just imagining you playing with rats. So going back to the word wonderful, what do you mean by you treat them wonderfully? Like, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, they're essentially like a pet in some ways.
Okay.
So you don't think, you know, you're treating your dog horribly when you have your dog, it has to stay in your house all the time. But with the rats, so they stay in their cages, they get their cages changed once or twice a week, depending. And they get ad lib food, ad lib water. I handle them daily, and I treat them as nice as I can because I want them to stay happy, healthy, and alive, because the longer they are in that condition, the more data I can get personally, which is a nice bonus.
Okay, so going back to your research findings, you've explained that you do keep them there for a period of time to get the data that you need. So if by chance one has an overdose and they die, what are the next steps then, so that we can reassure our audience in terms of how you look after your rats?
Well, I can assure the audience that that doesn't happen.
Okay.
So that satiety threshold, that upper level of cocaine that they maintain at, is far below what is required to induce any adverse effects from cocaine.
Right.
So in my 4+ years of doing these assays, I have never seen a rat overdose.
Oh,
and I've worked with like at least 100.
Oh, wow. That's excellent. Yeah. So in terms of when they finish, you know, when you finish your experiment, where do you move them to?
So we have an animal facility at
Mhm.
the university. So they stay in this facility where they are taken care of on a daily basis by animal care technicians.
Mhm.
I bring them up to the testing room where I test them, give them the cocaine, and then after they're done, I bring them back down where they're continued to be cared for.
Okay, well, that's brilliant. I think we've reassured everyone that's out there in regards to how well, you know, they are looked after. Going back to your research then, in terms of your findings, when do you think that, you know, you'll be able to test human subjects?
That would be exciting. So right now, for the antagonists,
Uh-huh.
it always takes a very long time for things to go from preclinical research to clinical research,
Mhm.
always years. So if it were possible, it's going to be after I graduate, essentially.
Okay.
So my boss, my PI, would have to be the one to take that to clinical, which he has experience doing since we currently are working on the first treatment for cocaine use disorders, and it's begun clinical trials. But
Excellent.
that one is an antibody. So the ones I'm working with primarily are dopamine antagonists,
Yeah.
and the antibody is specifically targeted to cocaine molecules. So we do the same thing. We give the animals this antibody, and then we allow them to self-administer cocaine. And what we find is the amount of cocaine required to prime them is proportional to the dose of antibody we give them. So more antibody, more cocaine required to get them to self-administer, meaning they won't take cocaine until they reach that level.
Okay. So going back to what you're working on now, when you start or when you get to that point, you know, when you've graduated, are you
Mm.
thinking to focus on females first or males, or do you want to mix both?
Well, actually, I have a mix going at the moment. So I have, you know, all these chambers in the room. I'm running female rats right now,
Yeah.
and it's just the first cohort of its size.
Mhm.
So it's still in its beginning phases, but what we've seen is that the underlying pattern of self-administration in females is identical to males. It just has variations in the levels of cocaine they maintain. So males will generally, let's say, maintain around 3,000 nanomole per kilogram of cocaine in their system. And that doesn't, I mean, it fluctuates a little, but not significantly. Whereas
Right.
the females, they fluctuate a lot. And that's been the primary tricky thing that I've been dealing with them. But overall, they still maintain at a consistent rate. And when I give the antagonist, it has the exact same effect that it has on the males.
Let me ask this. What made you want to research in this field? What interested you?
What interested me is there's no treatment, there's no cure, there's no help. These people are consigned to life of suffering if they have this disorder. It's not everybody who becomes dependent or addicted to drugs, but the ones who do, if you're, like I said, taking opioids or other drugs, you have something to help you.
Mhm.
And the fact that there is nothing for these people, to me, is just a huge failing as the scientific community and the medical community. So that's why I wanted to do this.
So is it because you come from a background whereby maybe your environment, there were a lot of people who were addicted, or was it purely just seeing on the news or documentaries? What inspired you?
It was so I don't have a lot of people in my life who are addicted. I do like personally, but I have met people who are.
Yeah.
So, but in general, it's more about helping people for
Mhm.
me. So I came into the PhD program. I do what are called rotations. I look around all the research, all the labs. And when I looked at this research, I was just amazed that there's nothing. That if you're cocaine dependent, that's it. That's your life. You can't do anything about it. Whereas most other things like cardiovascular research, cancer, there's already tons of treatments out there, and it's just making them better, which is also admirable, of course, and worthwhile. But the fact that there's nothing for this is really why I wanted to get into it, because I want to be there to help these people find something that can help them get over it or get through this incredibly difficult disease or disorder.
I mean, I agree that it's a disease, but it's self-inflicted. You go out there, you purchase what you want to purchase, and whether you inject yourself or you sniff it, I don't know what the process is, but it's itself that does that, isn't it? So I can understand why maybe there isn't that much research, because you're spending your own hard-earned money, or you're stealing money to enable yourself. So why should we as a society invest time, resource to help people that go out there and purchase something that they know that chances are I've got an addictive personality, I will be addicted. So why should we help that group, essentially?
Well, you can make the exact same argument about people who like fast food. Why would you go out and get a Big Mac?
I love Big Mac.
Me too, but you know, if you are eating Big Macs every day or whatever, unhealthy food every day, and then you get a heart attack, why should we have invested money in medicine and treatments to help you with that heart attack when you're in the hospital, when you chose to have that diet and you chose to live that life and put your money into it?
I think it's a bit different in terms of the UK and the US. Here, you know, we do pay money to ensure that we go into hospital. We say it's free, but it's not really free because we're paying through our NI and all that stuff, our taxes. So I don't know what the process is in America, but I believe that, you know, we do look after ourselves in the sense of we're all working. You've got people on the door, which is benefits. I don't know if you've got a benefit system there as well, but to ensure that everybody in the community has, you know, the medicine that they need, you know, they can get their teeth checked, whether they're addicted to fish and chips or a Big Mac, etc. We look after them because we are a community. And then we've got those who've chosen to go and buy cocaine and, you know, weed, and there's horse tranquilizers and there's balloons nowadays. There's so much out there. But I feel that if I've worked really hard, 365 days and a quarter, a leap year, and somebody decides to go and buy cocaine, whether they've gone on holiday, they've tried it, and then they come back here and they want to buy the one that's backdoor, and then they suffer from it, they're addicted. I feel like that's a bit selfish, because you know that the consequences for that are dire. Whereas if you eat a Big Mac, you're going through depression. Some people are emotional eaters, and some people don't even believe in therapy. So that's a bit different. And I think if I had an addictive personality, I would want to try it, because I'm like, oh, it looks exciting. I like fast cars, but I'm not going to go on the F1 and try and race, you know, Lewis Hamilton. So essentially what I'm trying to say is this is different from fast food, because fast food, you know, you can go and exercise, you've had your heart attack, we can put a pacer in there. Whereas when you're addicted to this, it's self-inflicted, and you know what the excitement is about. It's a bit different, and you know you can go to prison for it as well. You don't go to prison for a Big Mac.
Isn't that interesting too? So you've brought up two very interesting points. One, that it's criminalized, and two, that there's the main difference is you have a heart attack and we can treat you for it. And we can get you back out there, you can go exercise and you can get better. You get addicted to cocaine, you get thrown in jail, and you have to live with that for the rest of your life. You're now a felon, you're now like living out your sentence, then you get out of jail, and there's just somebody waiting for you with like a drug dealer waiting to sell to you again. And it's just a vicious cycle that continues repeating. So if there was some sort of treatment to help those people get better that wasn't put them in jail, do you think it would be more socially acceptable? Where, okay, this person got addicted to cocaine, we sent them to the hospital, they were given this treatment, now they're better, they don't take it anymore.
No, I think prison is the right route, because you're dealing with something that's class A for a reason, right? You go in there, you go through your shakes, your shivers, you get better, right? in the sense of you're not addicted anymore. You've gone through all of that. There's some people who don't make it, you know, we have to be reasonable in terms of that. But when you get out, you've got a choice, decision making. There's consequences. You know what you've been through, right? You have a choice. If you go back into that cycle, that's your decision. That's your choice. You know what the consequences are, so deal with it. Whereas if you're fat, you eat a Big Mac, you have a heart attack, we send you to exercise, you lose your weight, you've got a different diet in place. We work with you in terms of counseling, which is the same when you're addicted to drugs. There's counseling, you know, therapy, etc. You talk through it, you work through it. They give you, you know, risk assessment tools, etc. So it's the same for both sides, but the choice is yours. If you're going to go back into class A and end up in prison again, it's your choice. So why should we as taxpayers invest in you again for you to go and have free TV, you know, food? I have to go and work to eat my food.
So yeah, we're getting far from the research and more into the socioeconomical aspects of this. But to put it simply, going back to the pharmacological model, once you're at that priming point, we see in the rats that self-administration behavior occurs without fail. So as soon as they're primed, they will press that lever, and as long as they have access to cocaine, they will never stop pressing that lever. So if somebody goes to jail, comes out, they want to go straight, right? They want to get better. They have nothing they can do. They go to therapy. They can just straight force of will try to quit, and some people do, but it's not easy for everybody, just like it's not easy for everybody to exercise daily, have a healthy diet after they get a heart attack, etc. So if you were to give these people a treatment where they want to stop, but once they're primed, they can't stop. So if you have a treatment where you can prevent them from priming, and they never are going to go back, they're never going to take more cocaine, they're not going back into jail, you don't have to, as a taxpayer, fund them living in jail anymore because of it, then they've just gone through a normal treatment like any other disease.
Okay, so what is the cost behind that?
Behind treating people?
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you that. I don't know what the cost of treating people is. It would vary, right?
Yeah, it would vary. But if we were to look at the US right now, based on what I've seen online, the statistics, how many people are actually addicted, I feel like that's more than, you know, one can afford at this moment in time, based on our previous discussion in terms of where the US is in terms of borrowing funds. So is it actually a good investment for us to want to treat these people or just leave them? Because, you know, we are earning somehow because they had to go through money laundering, those who are supplying the drugs. So why should we invest in this as a country?
If you want less people in jail, less people for cocaine charges, and if you give them a treatment for it, you're going to see that. So that means less taxpayer dollars going to prisons to fund these people in jails. The drugs currently on the market that I'm using, they're not expensive. The dopamine antagonists are commonly given for antipsychotics at a higher dose than what I'm giving my animals.
Okay, so is that guaranteed then? Because would we be putting all the drug lords out of business if we go down this road?
Would that be such a terrible situation?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not in business with them, so I'm just asking.
Yeah.
What's of curiosity?
I mean, that would hopefully be an amazing outcome, right? But as we can see, we have treatments for opioids, and we haven't put the opioid industry out of business. So I can't say to that. That's a lot of extrapolation and speculation on my part, where I'm just here working with rats, and now we're blowing it up to my entire country. I can't say with certainty, but I can say in my rats that they do stop taking cocaine if you give it at the right time. Or if you give it after you've cut off access to cocaine, the rats will continue seeking cocaine or pressing the lever for about 45 minutes, 50 minutes. Whereas if I give this antagonist, that drops down to about 5 minutes.
Okay.
Or 0 if I give a high enough dose. So it just completely stops them. They've got cocaine in their system and they just stop trying to take it.
Okay. Brilliant. So I guess I'll move on from your research. I found it really interesting anyway.
I do too.
So to ask, in terms of your next plan, when you finish, you said you're finishing in a year. So
I plan to.
We'll see, fingers crossed. Depending on rats.
Yes.
Yes. So what are your plans? Do you want to do a postdoc, or are you done with academia?
So I am a little, I don't know if unique is the right word, but maybe uncommon. So I worked in the pharmaceutical industry before starting my PhD for several years. I'm a little bit older in my cohort of PhD students, and that's kind of why. So after I graduate, I intend to go back to the pharmaceutical industry. Now, as you know, a PhD scientist, in the future, I would love to essentially lead a research team to develop future therapeutics and treatments for diseases.
That sounds really exciting, and it will give back to so many communities, not just in the US, I think globally, if people follow you and they read what you're working on. So that's excellent. So good on you, and congratulations in advance. So in terms of advice, what advice would you give somebody like me that's, you know, thinking about something similar and I want to apply, having worked in industry and come into academic shoes, which is different, isn't it? Because you have to readjust the way you think and the way you evaluate things, especially if you led a team before, you have to communicate in a different way. So what advice would you give somebody that's going through the same transition as you?
I would recommend you maintain any and all connections you made while in industry, because if you want to go back in there, then you have an in, essentially. Like, don't burn your bridges. I regularly keep in contact with people from everywhere, just because that's kind of who I am. And it's really beneficial to see what they're doing and get their feedback on it, because they're still in the company and the industry, and they know what the trends are, and they're able to say, yeah, right now this company is just exploding and they're hiring up scientists like crazy. I would recommend you apply to them. Or, you know, you've already got this experience with one company, so you can go back to them and say, hey, I worked for you 5 years ago. We had like a really good work dynamic. Would you take me back in this higher position? Things of that nature. It really comes down to just networking. And I can't stress enough how important it is just to network in general, even if you aren't like coming from the industry, just to get out there and get to know people, because you never know what connections are going to pay off. And when you're networking, don't be like a hunter, you know, don't be somebody like, oh, I'm gonna go talk to this person and they're gonna get me this job. No, just talk to a bunch of people. Be like a farmer, you know, plant your seeds, water your crops, see if anything comes of it. If it does, you're going to benefit. If it doesn't, you still have made some great connections and friends along the way. So it's a win-win for you. But if you're trying to target somebody, like, you know, this is the manager of scientific hires or something, they're going to be able to tell immediately that that's why you're talking to them. That, you know, you don't actually care about them or whatever they're doing. You just want to get hired by them. Be careful doing that, is my advice.
It's difficult when you can see that somebody's just after one thing. It makes you feel like so cheap sometimes. I mean, not to say that I'm at that level, but you can tell when someone's literally hunting you. So I think those are amazing words to share with everybody, because I think we are told we need to network so that we can get our research out there, as you know, with publications. And we are told, you know, you need to network with these businesses so that you can get in there and conduct your research. So therefore, that's the main thing. It's like groupthink. You're hunting that, and you forget that these are people and they can tell. And, you know, 1 out of 10 times they can go no, but sometimes they want what you're selling as well, so you're hunting each other. But brilliant in terms of your words there. In terms of advice then to somebody who's just finished college, and well, college is different to you guys, isn't it? Sixth form?
Undergrad is what I'd call it.
Somebody who's just finished their undergrad and they want to go to grad school, what advice would you give them?
For if you're about to graduate now, I would say do lots of research on your department, on the PIs, read their papers, know what they're about before you get into it. And that also benefits you a lot when you talk to them, because now you can talk to them about their research and not go in, completely clueless, and hopefully give you the benefit of the doubt and not just look at you like, why the heck are you wasting my time?
Yeah.
If you are just beginning your undergrad career, I would recommend, if you have an interest in science, do internships in various labs. So your college or your university might have science labs where you can just get involved. That can give you a really good foundation for figuring out what you like. So if, I work with rats, I work with animals. If you were to do that, you go do an internship in a rat lab and you're afraid of them, you immediately realize, not for me. I'm going to go do something with cells. I'm going to do something with fruit flies. I'm going to not do rats and rodents because these scare me. So get as much of those experiences as you can while you can. It's really going to help you figure out what you like and what you don't like.
Brilliant. And yes, I'll stay away from rodents. Really terrified. I don't know if you know the history behind rodents in London. It was a terrible time.
Are you talking about the Black Plague or a different one?
That one.
None of my rats have any diseases.
No, I never said that. No. But no, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for sharing your research. I think it's great, and I think it will benefit some people. Some people maybe may not. So fingers crossed. Let's get the female rats doing their business in there, so we can get the gender equality. Eh?
Yes, that was another thing that had kind of shocked and surprised me, that no one has really been doing this in female rats. So I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm gonna do this because it needs to be done, and we need to know what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people do talk about a difference in female humans versus male humans, and so where's the difference coming from? I've already begun testing it for estrogen levels in females to see if that might be causing it, but it doesn't look like it so far. So it might be something else. Don't know.
Well, fingers crossed, we'll get you in for part 2 and you can explain further in terms of your findings, because I think that might be interesting to some viewers out there in terms of what the differences are. Thank you so much again for your time, and I wish you the best in terms of your final year.
Thank you. No, let me know if I can do anything to help you in the future, or if anyone else watching this needs help. I'm always here.
Definitely. It's all about networking. So yeah, it was lovely and very insightful. So thank you.
I'm glad I could help. Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching PhD Hard Talk.
Like, comment, share, subscribe.
Turn on your post notifications for new Hard Talk every Wednesday.
Let's expand our knowledge together.
Project dissemination
to the world.